This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the third season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is on leaving the law profession. Today we have Michelle Yeoh of Counsel at LVM Law Chambers LLC, and also we have Andrew Chan, partner at the law firm Allen and Gledhill LLP. Welcome to the podcast today. So we'll go with Michelle first. We saw an article you wrote about lawyers leaving the profession and all that. And we also heard from the New Law Society President Adrian Tan. He mentioned that a record 538 lawyers, they left the profession in 2021. In your opinion, why do you think more lawyers are quitting the profession?
Those statistics related mainly to young lawyers leaving local firms, which Andrew is a partner at. And in fact, many of these lawyers, and I don't know the statistics because I'm just a lawyer, but many of these young lawyers do go to join offshore firms, go in-house, or remain in the legal profession in a broader sense than simply staying, holding a practicing certificate, which I think that statistic related to. So that's the first caveat that I'm making here. I think the true statistic of people actually leaving legal profession as a whole, I'm not so clear about. But the second thing is, I wrote a little bit about this on my LinkedIn post, and since then I also spoke to a few younger lawyers. I wrote about, kind of law firms being run for profit, going a little bit cheaper on the employees and working them a little bit more, and then eventually running them into the ground. And I don't think this is specific to law firms. This is what we see, in capitalist structures everywhere, without restraints on this pattern of behavior. It's just sort of what we see everywhere.
Okay, so essentially you're saying that the young lawyers are working at a cheaper rate and working much harder. And you also specifically mentioned that Andrew is a partner at a law firm. So I think we can go to Andrew. So what are your take on this? Like, why are lawyers leaving the profession or leaving their law firms?
Sometimes when you ask a lawyer a question, hoping for yes or no or a straight answer, you will get.
Yeah.
It depends on the circumstances.
Sure.
It also depends on definitions. Adrian, when he spoke about the profession, I totally agree with Michelle. That's probably a reference to those who are leaving the Singapore bar, Singapore practice. And let's look at the circumstances by which these figures actually came out. I don't have the exact data, but when the concern was raised about the Great Resignation, that was Adrian speaking at the beginning of 2022. 2021 was an exceptional year. Exceptional because a lot of people moved. If one were to take the figures one step back, in 2020, you could equally argue the Great Retention because a lot of people stayed. 2021 is in a sense an artificial year because a lot of work which was held back in 2020 took place in 2021. So immediately internationally, people were trying to do the catch-ups and the works increases, hearings which adjourned took place in 2021. There was a great demand for legal expertise in 2021. In the light of this, the international firms paid phenomenal amounts. They were just looking for profits and what have you. So in a sense, pays increased broadly from some local firms, even the bigger firms, to the international firms. You're looking at a doubling, even possibly a tripling of salaries. This also meant that, as people moved, then from salary perspective, they took from the mid or the smaller firms. So in that sense, it was the great migration, not necessarily the great resignation out of the profession. Are the people really leaving the profession? Is this necessarily good or bad? What are the circumstances? What are the situations? And for that, I think there are a number of reasons or a number of points, and that hopefully we can discuss today.
both lawyers have defined like what do you mean by leaving the profession or leaving the firm and all that. But what we are really trying to ask is like there are some discussions about the workplace culture in the law firm and also like burnout issues being experienced by the lawyers. So how can the law profession address these accusations or these issues? Maybe we can go with Michelle first.
I think one problem is that there aren't very robust structures in place to deal with, and again, this applies to all companies, not just the legal profession, not just law firms, but to address culture and exploitation, harassment, bullying. The thing is, culture varies greatly from firm to firm. And I think in my team, my firm in particular, we do keep an eye on, especially on junior burnout and on workplace culture. My workplace has quite a strict no assholes policy. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word.
Okay, you've already said it, yeah.
I can say it again.
Okay.
A strict no mean people policy. And they are quite particular when they hire for that. And we are a mid-sized, on the small side, boutique firm. And of course, creating this culture comes down to the personalities who lead the firm. And when things are personality-driven, as they tend to be in firms, in law firms, especially in the smaller ones, where there's less HR oversight, where the managing partners do indeed call the shots, just like a CEO, in a company. Then if your partner is themselves a bullying character or is laissez-faire about what happens in the firm, then you get problems.
Okay, I hear you talking about your own law firm, but I also hear you saying some prevalent issues such as personality-driven, there may be less HR oversight and all that. So, Andrew, what's your take on this?
So I wrote, like Michelle, I wrote an article, but not the LinkedIn, but published by the Law Society in the Gazette, February edition, about the Great Resignation. I put into that particular article my record of how we've been able to keep a team. So I think that would qualify me to say something about this. Whenever we examine these issues, we must always ask the question of what are the circumstances. From a viewpoint of the senior lawyers, for them is, look, I've got work pressures, I've got to balance a book, I've got the demands of clients, I've got many things to look out for. Not infrequently, a lot of them lose their temper. Some of them are tyrants. Some of them, are just, very difficult to work with. Others recognize that, they moderate and they look at it. And others yet still recognize that at the end of the day, what do they want to be remembered for? How can they actually do something? To me, the messaging from the viewpoint of the seniors is really this: you can do a lot. Enough studies have shown that perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important factor in job happiness is the immediate boss, not technically your reporting line, but the person which one really works with. And that, to me, we can do so much. And to me, sometimes I find this debates like, nowadays the younger ones are not like us, but the circumstances have changed. In the days of old, I just relate a case, urgent matter. So they send a particular matter by telex, a few pages, and then they send by fax because it's thermal paper. So that is, it takes a while for 10 pages to come through. And then they say the rest of the urgent documents will come by courier 3 days later. Take urgent date in courts, we get it next week. It's not the same. To me, a good point of analysis is really this: the delta between competence and what is expected. While competence, because we have more tools, better learning and what, have increased, so has the expectations of what's actually required. What we can do as seniors is to reduce the delta. So one of the things which I do in my team, because I've been fortunate enough to be able to keep people of all seniorities, or more or less, so the juniors can do something which is more opposite to them, and likewise the seniors, something which is more challenging. And given this, if you like, delta or difference between competence and the work, I can control work to some extent because with a team you can distribute. I can control competence because I help them. I do a lot of personal training. And the net effect of which is within my team, there's a lot of continued success because everything is achievable and it becomes a cycle. Now, some people say, oh, that's because, you have advantage of a team, but I did not start like this. Do what you can. And the point is really this. To me, the better thing to do is to have an honest discussion, to identify the issues, to work together and see how we can achieve this together. Sometimes it does not work. Some people need to leave. I've had people leaving me as well. But if one has this honest discussion, looking at the circumstances, seeing what you can actually do, bridging the gap, giving hope, so much can be done.
I hear both of you, but we still do hear a lot of talks about being lawyers. You still have long hours and all that. So I hear you, Andrew, you mentioned about training your colleagues, personal training and all that. But how would a junior lawyer be able to navigate this, especially if, we expect a lot of lawyers to work OT and you don't get OT pay and all that. Yeah, how do you go about doing this? Maybe Michelle first?
I think Andrew raised some wonderful points. One of the most important things in practice is to practice as a team. I thought that was powerful. They are very overworked, very busy, terrifyingly so, lawyers themselves. And I would say even as I'm a fairly junior lawyer myself, and it's not so long ago that I was starting out in practice, especially compared to some of the seniors in the room. And I do remember that it wasn't the long hours that were my problem. And it's what I see in my juniors as well. They are happy to put in the hours, especially those who, are not yet married, don't yet have children, have fairly free weekends. They are very eager, they're very willing. And I'm not saying that this is should be the case. I'm not saying that law firms should, make use of the willingness of juniors to make them work longer and longer hours. But that is simply the demand of the job. Many times, in light of court deadlines, client demands, I hope Andrew agrees with this. Many times, these hours are not within our control, not even within the control of the senior partners. And I see my own senior partners working incredibly long hours themselves. So that's one thing. It's not necessarily the hours alone that, cause burnout. Certainly they do, but it's culture. It's, as Andrew said, how your interactions with the people you come into contact with the most. Often your immediate boss, your immediate superior. And it's very often also for junior lawyers, learning how much they learn. Many of my juniors tell me, I left this place because it wasn't a training ground. I wasn't learning. I was left to do everything without guidance, right? And that is a problem. But when they come to a place where there's structure, where there's scaffolding, and this is it's quite a basic educational principle, right? I think what Andrew raised, the delta between competence and expectation, this is this kind of incremental learning is excellent for juniors. It is what juniors look out for, other than pay, other than hours. And we can't really divorce it either from the competition that the offshore firms bring, and one more big one, the competition that the big tech firms bring in terms of pay, right? You have Facebook, you have Twitter, Meta now, right? Offering way higher salaries than people are getting in the local law firms. And it's not because the local law firms are necessarily hoarding the profits. It's just the kind of profits that we're seeing in big tech far outstrip. So there are those pressures. And I think what where our local law firms can pip, right, these extraneous factors is in culture and in training. Because you don't, for juniors who are passionate, who want to practice in the local legal context, the kind of training that they could potentially get in law firms could really outweigh the other factors. It's difficult, but I think it's a very important one. I wouldn't understate it.
So your question relates to, for the younger lawyers and what have you. To me, a younger lawyer or someone coming on, it would really help if they had examined this question several years before they started work. Where you are placed in your early position, sometimes it's just simply apply general knowledge. Internships, for one, is an opportunity to find out about teams. There is enough of a correlation to show that quite a number of interns do actually get placed within the firms or the people they actually worked with. So this is actually your test because, sometimes you just do very late and just wait, leave it to chance and what have you. No, so the point is really this, I said before, it depends on the circumstances. So to me, start earlier, look at the sort of this. Of course, everything with balance. I've seen people who do like 3-4 internships, in the holidays. I'm not an advocate of that. The point is also then competence in the preparation. So before I started work, I actually, in my holidays, sort of read a bit of books, as to what it could be. Of course, those days we had fewer opportunities. Do what you can before you come in. Control what you can. Example, I've seen enough of people who get into a work, but they have not enough rest. They say overwork or what have you. How do they balance? They escape by what? Lots of gaming. That takes off their time, and then you got not enough rest, and then you get work, and then it affects your performance. Now, everything in moderation. Of course, in real extremes, then frankly, sometimes where there's abuse or whatever, there is a place to leave, and move on. The other thing is have that honest discussions with bosses because it's also their interest to actually keep a team is actually better. And also, one thing is really this, to me, the attitude of gratitude. So I was coming out and I was looking for ministry or something to actually work. And sometimes people say prayer is a dangerous thing. So I prayed and I was placed into the drug ministry. And not only was and that to me was a strike balance. So you come to office, get scolded by sometimes partner, by client, by even your colleagues and what have you, or judges and what have you, feel very terrible. Then you go for counseling. Andrew, my wife is divorcing me, my father is going to die. Once I went to a halfway house, after three whole months of counseling, this guy was said he was in loggerheads with his father. He's going to be reconciled. And I said, very good. But what happened the following week, I went back way before the times of mobile phones and say what? He died because he went home, he was high on drugs. His father said to him, Hokkien, this class time I don't have, he says, okay, don't have, he jumped. See, the point is really this, if you have an attitude of gratitude and doing what we can and finding purpose greater than work and seeing work facilitate that, I think it makes a lot of difference. We do what we can. We do what we can. I tendered twice my resignation in Gledhill because I could not cope. Each time they actually adjusted.
What did they do?
So the first time they moderated my work.
Okay.
But there's only so much you can actually moderate. I was doing well. But with well comes pressure. In my first year, I actually argued 2 injunctions myself. Very rare for a first year. But I burnt out. I quit. And then my work was adjusted. The second time, I moved to research. Now is known as knowledge management. Those days, research was the department of litigation, so I still kept in touch with some litigation. But I was going home at 6-something. I took a pay cut. But much later on, as I matured, I came back to full-time practice. So there is a different season or different things which you can do at different points of time. And to me, I think people need to strike a balance at different points of time. Do what you can. And I'm very grateful I did not leave. But I could not cope. Also, perhaps that's why, to me, I feel I have a duty to help the younger ones. Let me say something publicly. It is okay to feel stupid, incompetent, cannot make it, want to give up in early practice. I did. But sometimes, before you take what seemed to be an easy step to move on, have you done what you can? Have you thought through the longer terms? Have you considered perhaps staying on for at least a while? Each circumstance is different. I'm glad I stayed.
I would be audacious enough to add to what Andrew has said. I think, first of all, when he talked about examining ourselves and doing our homework early on, I would go even earlier, and I would say before joining law school, before applying for law, kids need to understand what law is about, what they're getting into. I myself went into law school not knowing what law was.
You just thought it was cool, right?
No.
And typing.
No, it was more like my A-level results got me there. My parents were very happy.
Okay, makes sense.
So, yeah, and I feel like that's the way many kids go. I think these days, with better information, with the internet, with career guidance in schools being better, I think this may have ameliorated the issue somewhat. But children, they are children, do need to understand what they're getting into, what law is, what legal work looks like before they enter. Second, I think Andrew spoke quite passionately of, this his purpose in work, and I do agree that it helps a lot for lawyers, for anyone really, to feel a sense of mission, to see, and I think it has been shown that people stick around longer when they do feel that they are fulfilling some kind of higher calling, some sort of mission. Personally, this was why I joined public service. To begin with, I started out in crime, doing, coincidentally, drug crimes, and moved on to legislation drafting. And I think the beauty of public work is that you truly do feel the impact that your work is having on large swathes of the public. And that's a reason many people stay in the public sector. Not to say that there is no mission in the private sector. I think there is great meaning in running a business that treats its employees fairly, that does great work, in which all the lawyers are craftsmen who continually hone their crafts. And from how Andrew speaks, I feel like he is another practitioner who lives that out. Now that's a sense of mission that younger lawyers see older practitioners live out. And I think that creates a sense of mission and inspiration for younger lawyers, which then comes into competition with all the other pressures we spoke about earlier, pay, hours, kind of pain. And when you don't see older practitioners living this out, I think you do get a lot of younger lawyers just getting disillusioned and leaving.
It's interesting because, Andrew, you publicly told us that you tendered twice, and I really wanted to get into this question about generation gap. A lot of people tend to say, it's this young generation that they cannot deal with all that. So I really just wanted to ask, is there really a generational gap in terms of values and expectations?
The way I look at it is more useful than generational gap. It's generational circumstances.
Okay.
Again, taking the very start point, the difference between competence and, if you like, expectations. Competence, I think, over time has gone up. We got better law schools, better opportunities to learn, etc. But so has the pressures. Everything is instantaneous. The law has become more complex and what have you. My guess, and I think I can fairly say this, the delta between, or the difference between competence and what is expected has actually increased. Some people say, the young ones cannot stay or what have you. That's because they've had more to cope with. And that is where, to me, is when we recognize it's actually different, then we begin to have, I think, honest conversations on what we can actually do. So to me, I think the better question is, now in these circumstances, what can we do? What can we learn from the past? Some things are constant. Do what you can. Improve where you can. Okay. Have honest conversations, good mentorship. That's true. And to me, let me leave a message to senior lawyers here. It is to your advantage to look out and help develop your team. Because when you do that, number one, people stay with you and they grow in competence and in confidence, which is good for you. Number two, what actually happens is that it's less disruptive, it's better for your clients, that you actually get people around and there's a continuity in work. Number three, actually, it's helped me achieve my own work-life balance. So I have time to, I do work hard, but my hours are manageable. I keep most of my weekends. I get to do other things. I get to write articles. I get to do a podcast like this.
Okay. Michelle, what do you think about the generational gaps?
Well, when I was in law school, which was more than 10 years ago now, despite what I said about being fresh out of school, I remember someone giving a talk and saying, hey, here are the statistics. After 5 years, about 50% of each cohort remains in legal practice, right? And after 10 years, the number dwindled to something like 20%. I don't remember the exact figures now, but it was low. And it was basically people setting the expectation for us that about half of you will not be practicing anymore after about 5 years. This was 13 years ago, which is a generation ago. It's more than a generation ago. And those numbers were drawn from the batches, the generation before us. So I find it difficult to agree that there's a generation gap in that when we look at younger lawyers and say, look at you want to leave. Look at these older lawyers still around. They have slogged it out. You all just want to leave. It's because you're young. The only difference between you is that one is older, one is younger. So it must be a generation gap. I think in those statements there are many biases that need to be unpacked. We're looking at the older lawyers who have stayed around, but how about all those who have left? Their voices are not being heard, right? We don't understand their circumstances, as Andrew pointed out. We don't know what they went through to leave and how that's different today. So I would be very slow to attribute young lawyers' attrition rates to the generation gap. And I would also be very concerned about looking at both the macro and the micro pressures surrounding each generation before reaching that conclusion. Does human behavior change so much over the years? I'm not sure. Would we be seeing the same things 2 generations ago had they been facing the same sort of pressures, push and pull factors that our young people are facing today? I would suspect so, to be honest.
So it's striking that you mentioned that the attrition rate is 50% more than 10 years ago and is around the same or a bit higher right now. My question is, why isn't anything being done to change this? Why is the attrition rate so high over so many years?
So my class, we're going to do a gathering in next month. So, but looking at that, only percentage has remained in the profession and or legal related, and some of them have done other things and the like. So the reality is this. To me, the better question is the finding of meaning. To me, less important is the statistics. And my point is that insofar as the legal profession is concerned, see it for its strengths and what it can do. From early in life of general applications, in fact, it helps you develop a trained mind. It gives you an opportunity to contribute to society. Very early on into practice or time of university, and I thought after my first year I want to go full-time into prison fellowship ministry and what have you. So Gerard Yi, the son of Liang, the father of charity in Singapore, told me this. He says, Andrew, if you do that, you can probably help a small number of people. You continue to practice, and you put yourself in the position. In many ways, you can help more. Think about that. So the point is this: what can we do? How can we find meaning? The profession has lots to offer, but the reality is this: it is not for everybody, and that is okay. But for those parts of the profession, let's see what we can all do. I mean, the article I wrote about the principles of how I look in terms of keeping a team. Do we have a place of stress or safety? Because if it is so stressful, people can't even work. Are there opportunities which can help develop people? Is there transparency? Is there trust and the like? How do we distribute work? How do we allow people to grow? And in the light of all of this, why, to the extent we can, because we cannot control all the circumstances, there'll be tough days and what have you, we don't pretend otherwise. Make it the best that we can. Let us all grow together. Let us do the best that we can. Let us contribute. Let us make a difference. That to me is more important than the numbers, because I think numbers will fluctuate. But eternal principles, making a difference, is perpetual.
Okay.
I agree with Andrew that people leaving the profession is not necessarily a bad thing. When people leave, we have to see why. If people have decided law is not for me, I derive meaning somewhere else. I think that's a very good and legitimate reason for people to leave, and there's not very much the profession as a whole can do about it, right? If you're a junior thriving in Andrew's wonderful team and you're learning and there's everything that can be done for a junior is being done for you, and then you say, look, I don't want to be a lawyer. I think fair play. I mean, there's another set of people people who leave, right? And these are people who are really they would have loved to stay, but they leave because they are burnt by experiences in the legal industry. And I think that's really the group that we're thinking of here. And I mean, I've heard my fair share of horror stories from the industry, of course, from my friends, and many of which cannot be repeated in public. And I would say we are definitely losing good talent, from the industry as a whole because of untrammeled power within firms, perhaps. Like I said, they are very often personality driven, and there's not very much you can do, if the culture within the firm as a whole is problematic. I have heard of juniors being shouted at for speaking to secretaries outside of working hours, asking innocent questions, being accused of all kinds of things. So the question is, what can be done? Who is in a position to do anything about it? And then there are many stakeholders here, right? We have the regulators, we have the lawyers themselves who are represented here. But what we don't have here, who we don't have represented here, are the regulators. Andrew and I suppose, could give our 2 cents, but we don't have the information, the kind of information that the regulators do, right? The kind of levers that they could pull. And I think, their voice would be very welcome.
So you're talking about policies and regulations and all that, because this actually leads to my next question about, are there any measures in place to support lawyers who are perhaps facing abusive harms and all that?
Within my firm, I mean, there are avenues which people can complain and certain action can actually be taken. But in terms of avenues of burnout, for example, I think it's, give an example. So within our litigation department, we have charts that basically set out, how busy you are, how available you are within a particular period, because, we are of a certain size. So people have a sense. People seek to be able to distribute this information. I mean, it's not your team, my team. We keep this, we actually make this actually available. My firm in recent times have also provided counseling services. A very small number have utilized it. We don't ask the questions, we don't follow up, we leave it to them so that we maintain the confidentiality. But these people have stayed. And it's actually manageable. Of course, so the point is really this: management can do a lot of things. And the heart of the particular matter is let's I think be realistic in terms of what we can actually do. But the point that Michelle, and I think we're all looking at, to the person who's burnt out, what exactly is your message? I mean, number one, to me, a person who's burnt out is essentially very often loss of hope. They find ways of escaping. To me, is number one, I mean, you can go into deep depression, and I've seen enough of cases and what have you. I mean, to me, it's like, there's no tomorrow. It's a situation where you're looking for the weekend, if at all you have a weekend. The Monday before you come back, sometimes a cold sweat, cannot sleep at night. I've seen enough of those sort of things. So to the people, they need hope. First, find someone you can talk to. Find something which is greater than yourself. Try to the extent that you can. I know very often what they do, sometimes they escape into various activities like gaming, not sleeping right through. You need exercise, you take care of yourself. And work through this, have a discussion with the partner, and if the partner or whoever the boss is not even willing, the discussion is just very dismissive, then that's a sign that this is not a place for you.
Michelle? I think you wrote about having an anonymous whistleblowing hotline, right?
I would like that. I think I would like that. And then the question would be what actions can then be taken, right? I mean, Law Society does have the powers to investigate and discipline errant practitioners. But, I mean, to be very realistic, we are a small fraternity. Nobody really likes to make enemies within this small fraternity. This is again a recurring theme in many industries in Singapore. We are a small country. The number of practitioners in Singapore, if I'm not wrong, only about 6,000 of us, which is tiny, and it's very difficult to make powerful people accountable, to these measures. You do need a strong. I think it does come down to the will of, I'm sorry to put this in Law Society, but Law Society, to there is no one else. This is what they were set up for. We do have the structure in place. It's just there may not be appetite, for pursuing certain egregious complaints to the fullest extent required. And then, of course, Law Society is not within my control or the control of Andrew. Maybe to a larger extent than mine. But what is within our control as individuals within the firms? I think Andrew has brought up some good ones. Within my firm, we are, well, I'm not sure how much I can publicly say, but we are very accommodating with juniors' burnout. So, and we do see, juniors going at it for 2 years and then going completely flat. And then they're good juniors, we want to keep them. So we work as a team to cover them. We try and give them the rest that they need. I think, but again, that is down to, the individual practitioner. It is not a structural fix. I'm just wondering, Andrew here is a partner and is well aware of the pressures of practice. I'm wondering what Andrew thinks of mandatory coverage for psychological counseling for law firm employees.
Like I said, my firm had already provided engaged and made available such services. If you ask me whether this should be made mandatory, my answer is yes.
Okay.
But it may not be a popular view, but that's my view.
I'm cheering on the insight for Andrew here.
Okay, so I don't think this is common in other law firms, right?
Sorry, so for us, we engage someone external. We don't have internal abilities to do that. And within our firm, we don't ask for the report because, that way people have reluctance. So that's how we have operated. And it's well, I also use the word recent times because it's not like we had this like 10 years ago. So, but it's worked well. And I think the reality is this, when I spoke about the times when, about the story about, cannot sleep at night, sweat at night, whatever, that's actually also my own story.
Oh,
because there were times I just could not cope. So I adjusted. I took a pay cut to move to research, but yet because it was part of litigation, I still kept in touch for many years. And the reality is this: 2 times in both my resignations, I made adjustments. And you can do this. And there were times where I just felt very incompetent. There was once I was given a particular task, and it was actually not very difficult. And I was told such a simple thing as you do not know how to do, you'll never be a good lawyer. Those days, people will tolerate these things. But I survived, and the point is really this: one must look at beyond, I think, individual circumstances. If it is true and it continues, or that is abuse, then I think then that should not be tolerated. Within my team, we have a rule that if they tell me there's something wrong, I promise not to get angry. In the article I wrote about a situation where one of my associates came to me and said, "Andrew, I made such a mistake," and he could see me cringing, and then says, "You promised not to get angry." We laughed, and then we resolved the issue. The times, and I do get angry once in a while, I try not to. I have another rule: I apologize. We minimize it, we looked up. But because we have a system where they can tell me where we make mistakes, we rectify it. And so within my team, and so when I get angry, I go to my team member and I say, look, I'm sorry I raised my voice and what have you. And the point may be wrong. I mean, what they did may be wrong and what have you. But there's no need for me to act unreasonably. And I think I went overboard. I'm sorry. And so once I said that to one of my associates, and they looked at me and said, Andrew, it's okay. It's for my good. Develop that level of trust. You know, when they have problems, they will come to you, and we are just so much better for it. And to me, the reality is this: you run and you look after people, they will look after you, they will look after your practice, and you know who ultimately also gains? Your clients. And who is it? It's also better for your own self.
Okay.
One resource that I find very useful in working with juniors and management is other lawyers, other people around my age or senior to me, and I also follow quite a few like respectful interaction sort of Instagram accounts on Instagram, which helps a lot. So they're mainly parenting accounts, but I think they are very applicable to interactions in the workplace as well. So as Andrew has raised the situation, right, where of course you get angry, then what do? I try and pause, I try and breathe. All these self-regulation techniques that I'm being told by Instagram to apply with my child, my toddler, I apply in the workplace.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's also good for my own mental health. And I think that's an issue in law firms. The higher we go, the lonelier it gets, right? I think maybe in a large firm like A&G, you get a little bit less of that because you do have a larger stable of partners, right? Who are colleagues as well. But then in the smaller firms where you have one managing partner, two managing partners, I'm sure I haven't been in that position, but I'm sure it gets pretty lonely, and there's no structure in place to help you, to help you manage your firm. And I think that's what can be done there. Of course, there can be conferences, there can be focus groups, but who organizes them? Whose back do we put the monkey on, right? And if we have those things, will the senior practitioners attend? Is another question. They're very busy people. I wonder if Andrew has any insight here.
Okay, the boss of Andrew.
Well, on some of the programs and what have you, and not only we make time, sometimes we create it. One of the things I do is I do heritage walks. So I get my interns, I get clients, and sometimes some of the lawyers to actually walk with me because I'm a lover of history and I get exercise as well. The firm has wellness programs, which we try to do. We've got sports programs, we've got recreation programs. We have what they call lessen some of our space to actually have a lounge, because I think that's actually important. Now, some people say, you can only do this in larger firms. But to me, the smaller firms have also some advantages. They have the personal ability to deal with each other. They can spend their time. So the point is really this. To me, one of the most important factors continues to be personal mentorship. All the other things we've done and we've done in LVM Gledhill, I think are fantastic, helpful. But you, your team, yourselves, you can make a lot of difference. Again, my message for senior practitioners.
Do you think this issue about workplaces and long hours, burnout, is it applicable to other industries also?
Let me put it this way. So when I wrote the article in February, the accountants have published it in their newsletter in April. The doctors are going to republish that same article in the July edition of the SMA News. So obviously, they have said that, at least speaking to some of them, they found it helpful. Of course, there are differences because, always one needs to recognize, what are the circumstances. For doctors, they actually bonded in their housemanship period or their period they need to see out their government bonds and the like. So it's not exactly the same. But in some senses, if you are bonded, it's actually more pressure because you have to live in these circumstances or pay a huge financial penalty. So I think there are differences, but yet there's commonality. Commonality, how do you manage stress, how do you give opportunities, how do you, how you're equitable, how you yoke, how you balance the points which I've touched upon in my particular article. So it is similar, but yet with some differences. But the core points, I believe, are similar.
Yes. Very simply, yes. And I can only speak for the legal industry because that's the industry that I am in. But I have had some very deep interactions with the social services industry. And the problem there is probably worse. And I think Andrew would have seen this as well. He would have seen, I think there's a lot of social worker burnout. And I mean, that's not for me to talk about much, but definitely wherever, in any industry that I've come to contact with, I see similar issues. And I see the same themes of mission being a great but not the be-all and end-all factor in keeping people. And I see the same issues of, like structural gaps, I think, in, I think this is where policymakers could come in, where they empower employers to empower their employees, with rules, with minimum standards, maybe. I see it as empowering because I think in the end everyone wins. I don't think employers win if employees are constantly burnt out and leaving, and I think Andrew has confirmed this, right? And again, who is in charge of each sector? Of course, MOM oversees everyone as a whole, but different sectors have their own regulatory bodies, and a lot of it really is down to these bodies. I feel to effect top-down change, and then then of course we've got the other stakeholders, the company owners, the CEOs, middle management. I used to think the burden was all on regulators. I was that kind of person, but I think, unfortunately or not, in a community that's everyone has a role, and everyone's actions have a deep impact on those around them.
Okay.
Sorry, just to take the example, because Michelle mentioned, social workers. So I'm involved in some of that, but to me, just to share a personal experience. So after many years of counseling drug addicts, once I felt quite down because I was speaking to this guy who had been in and out of DRC a number of times, and I told him, look, you share your counsel, but so many of them just fall back into the habits, how shall I put this? No real success rate, right? And he told me something, Andrew, you do what you can do. Because you've actually impacted some and you made a difference in some, you just continue to do. And that's something which I then realized, and that's a principle I apply my team, that you are called to be faithful, not successful. So for me, in our team, we measure ourselves in terms of have we done our best. And the results will follow, because otherwise you win a case, you're very happy, you lose a case, you're unhappy. So that's how one way which I think, can we shift our attention to having done our best and doing a good job and focusing on that as our goal? We can't pretend that success does not matter, but very often if you have done your best and just looked out at how well you've done something, consequences follow.
With Andrew's example, I think he actually raises the point, maybe without saying it explicitly, but he raises the point of, the dangers of this idea of individual responsibility taken to an extreme. Because, a drug counselor, and I say this with some authority because, I used to prosecute drugs, and I also, but more than that, I've worked with families touched by drug addiction for many years. Still do. With drugs, of course, I think it is not controversial that addiction is also a medical issue. And the drug counselors in Singapore, I think they do admirable work, and it's good for them to acknowledge, it's not all on them. Things are not entirely within their control, and I think this brings me back to what I said earlier, which is that everyone has a responsibility. So the medical professionals have a responsibility, in that case, the regulators again have a responsibility. And then the question is, what do we prioritize? I think we haven't really talked about priorities in this conversation. But, if we as an industry, we decide the priority is profit, then, I think burning through juniors to rake in profit at all costs in the short run is it will be the logical outcome. If we believe that, and I think that a balance of longer term profit together with, the welfare of our employees, and the health of our industry as a whole, right? And our industry being known to be humane and to do really good work. I think if we manage to push all those things as priorities, I know it's a bit much and difficult, then maybe we'll be able to recalibrate, the circumstances of our juniors, but also of the seniors.
So just to wrap up, I hear both of you about individual responsibilities, about policymakers needing to effect change and all that. I just want to ask one last question. If there's one thing that you can change, what is it?
Myself.
Yourself?
Always looking to do better. And to me, actually it's not just myself, it's everybody. See, one of the things that I shared in the article as well is that I preach at wakes. At wakes, people very often, you mentioned achievements such and such, but it's really the moments of kindness. It's the father-in-law who took boiled barley and brought to the daughter-in-law several blocks away, walked there. It is the mother who cut flowers with her hands all, scarred and in fact partly deformed, looking after. It is the neighbor who looked after the daughters while the neighbor's daughter, while the daughter is away. And then the wife asked him, why you take care? This is not even your own daughter. He says, you want to take care, you must take care of people. These are the things which people remember. So to me, is what do you want to be remembered for?
I think fear would be the thing I would want to change. I see many decisions in our, and I mean by everyone, being driven by fear. And I think it's counterproductive. And I mean this from juniors all the way up to senior practitioners. Sometimes, perhaps, I can only guess, on the part of regulatory bodies. And fear of different things, right? Everyone has a different fear. The juniors are afraid that the senior will scold them. The seniors are afraid the partner will scold them. Or everyone's afraid that the clients will get upset with them and leave. Everyone's afraid of losing money. And then, of course, everyone's afraid of the powerful people, including the powerful people themselves, also afraid of other powerful people. I wish that we could be driven not by fear, but by principle all the time. This would be a utopia, but I think we can keep working towards it.
Thanks. In closing, I would like to thank my guests, Andrew and Michelle, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on Omni.fm, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Please follow or subscribe to the On Diversity podcast to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more info.